and are joined by Oana Popescu-Zamfir, Director, GLOBALFOCUS CENTER. Good evening and welcome to the show.
Hello, good evening, and thank you for the invitation.
So we were just watching this short report, right, on defense spending and its importance. So let me start by asking you this: Poland is one of the countries that spend around 4% of its GDP on defense at the moment, but some countries are reluctant to spend so much. What are their arguments?
Well, I think it's roughly a matter of threat assessment, of the difference in threat assessment and in how we see this strategic moment, whether we see it as strategic or not. And I think the European camp is very much divided still between those who realize that this is genuinely a make or break moment when we cannot just take incremental measures to defend against Russian aggression, and not just against Russian aggression against the Ukraine and what Moscow is currently doing, but we need to plan for the future, and we need to realize this is a multi-year confrontation with not just Russia, but revisionism in general, and opponents of an international rules-based order. So then the response to this is either, for some member states, one where they try to adjust some of their positions without necessarily going out of their way to change, to shift completely or overhaul their thinking and their defense arrangements. Whereas for others, I think they realize that we need to stay on top of the game and take preventative measures and then reinforce the security of the continent in a way that it would serve as a powerful deterrent against future aggression.
A powerful deterrent. We need to stay on the top of the game. And it's not just about Russia. So would you agree that the EU, in fact, needs an army?
Well, no, not necessarily. I think this would be to underestimate what NATO can do. I think we have a functioning alliance, and the fact that it's a little bit more, let's say, fragile now ahead of US elections, doesn't mean that we should abandon what it rather reinforce it. So I do believe in stronger contributions from European members of NATO to NATO. And in parallel, I do believe that at the level of the EU, we do need to strengthen our strategic autonomy, but maybe through something like a rapid deployment capability to meet the Helsinki headline goals, where we need to have a sufficient number of troops that we can mobilize and maintain for sufficient periods of time. But I do believe that EU-NATO cooperation is paramount and that we should definitely avoid duplications.
Mm-hmm. I see. So, well, that's also what I thought, that it would ultimately lead to actually weakening of NATO because countries wouldn't afford, paying for NATO army and for the EU army. So.
A zero-sum game, so to speak. We have two alliances. Both of them are functional. Both of them have huge potential. I think we need to make sure that we use each of them to the best of its potential.
Mm-hmm. Right, and speaking of NATO, NATO commanders warn that within the next 20 years there will be a possible military confrontation with Russia. So I guess this is a serious threat, hence various kinds of exercises are taking place. But my question is, to what extent should NATO countries and EU countries involve countries which are not in these alliances? How important that is to perhaps form some form of a coalition that would be, sort of have this interoperability and other things?
Look, I think increasingly we're talking about European security, not EU or NATO security. And I think we have seen this in recent times, and the importance of alignment on foreign policy and security has become one of the top requirements from aspiring EU candidate countries. it's not yet enshrined in the enlargement process, but I believe with the next Commission it might be. And it would probably be a good idea to try and involve these countries that are like-minded, as long as they align with Europe, including on sanctions, close to 100%, then we absolutely need to support their capacity building, involve them in European structures such as the European Defence Agency, the European Peace Facility, assist them with both financially and in terms of, like I said, capacity building to integrate more and become more interoperable with us. I think security is really rising to the top of priorities, including in EU enlargement and in everything that has to do with our immediate vicinity. And we absolutely need to close ranks with all like-minded states. So that is something that will have to be formalized once the European elections are passed. And one of the ways, as we already know, will likely be a commissioner for defense. So I think we're seeing really important steps in that direction. It is just important that we continue down that path and we step up our game.
There's also a commissioner for diplomacy, but some are not taking him very seriously because there's no EU army. So there's no true strength behind this diplomacy, apart from economic strength, of course. But having said that, I'm wondering whether, because money is one thing, obviously, but shouldn't Europe somehow revive its arms production? Because that's what lacks now, especially in the face of Russian aggression in Ukraine.
That is already part of the plan that's been laid out by the Commission just recently in terms of ramping up both joint procurement and the European defense base, industrial defense base, and our capacity to produce more. Money will continue to be very important. It might be the most important thing because the investment so far, I think, is more to start the process, but not necessarily to bring it to where it should be. We will probably have to see the Euro bonds that are meant to function as a guarantee to the defense industry, that European states stand beside them in this endeavor. We would ideally need to ramp up production fast and quite significantly, as well as cooperation with other global allies that actually already have the capabilities. We've already seen that happen. Europe will not be able to catch up as fast as we need the ammunitions and the weapons, so partnerships will continue to be important, but absolutely in the next few years will probably have to be dedicated to improving our own production capabilities.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think it should be done? I mean, that the respective countries produce, I don't know, tanks and the others missiles, or should we already rely on the infrastructure we already have in Europe?
I mean, that's something that NATO has already tried to implement with mixed results, I would say, which is pooling and sharing, and the concept of smart defense essentially also aims to avoid duplications. So, again, we're talking optimal outcomes, which would really be that if we have a union, and our European Union will have to become a defense union as well, then we work together to try and as much as possible get the best return on investment, because we will have to make more contributions, and I think we will see that very soon, that there will have to be higher budgetary contributions from member states, multi-annual. So we really cannot afford to waste any money. Then ideally, again, we would be very smart about which country invests in what, and we would pull and share. But that is something that is still not exercised enough at EU level. I think cooperation will come rather painfully, but it's for sure an exercise that we will have to do, just because virtually none of our countries, with very few exceptions, Poland being one of them, actually has the diversification and has thrown in the money necessary to be able to be at the level where we need to be, which is indeed somewhere rather around, when we talk about NATO contributions, a war economy. And even I think that's an overstatement, but an economy that prepares for war, hoping for peace, would be somewhere at around 4.5% of GDP investment, not even at the 2%, which is the NATO target.
All right, let me just ask you briefly about the radical right, because it's one of the topics we were discussing in the context of the European parliamentary elections. And these parties are not necessarily united on the front of defense. For instance, Marine Le Pen is not too fond of NATO, right? Whereas some others, would be. So my question is, how dangerous, how big a threat these political parties constitute following the vote?
Well, obviously, one of the obstacles to working together, because that's what we've been discussing, the necessity of working together more. One of the main obstacles is the nationalization of policies. We see not just the nationalization of ideas of security and foreign policy, we also see economic protectionism. So with as much as potentially a quarter of the European Parliament being made up of far-right nationalist forces, that will, and any form of higher and deeper cooperation will obviously be more complicated. It will require more complex negotiations. It is the first time that we actually see the possibility of cooperation between the EPP, the European People's Party, and the far right on some of the economic issues, especially it's not necessarily a given. I'm quite sure the centrist coalition of Social Democrats and the People's Party will do its best to preserve its current pro-European orientation. But on some issues, we might actually see alignment, like I said, between the EPP conservatives and the far right. That will be problematic because it actually threatens consensus building to a significant extent. And obviously, even if that doesn't happen, the fact that a quarter of the European Parliament will be made up of these radical forces means that they are representatives of an electorate that we cannot marginalize. So the European Parliament will have to cater to the ideas and the values that they represent in Parliament. And that's going to complicate things at, frankly, not a very good time for Europe.
Complicated things are the very essence of democracy. Oana Popescu-Zamfir, Director of Global Focus Center, was our guest tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.